Hello, everyone. So welcome back after the break. Yeah. So why don't we? So this session we want to try to meditate on the ultimate nature of the mind and of the person, which is quite a tall task. No, it's not something easy to do. It can be quite complicated, but why don't I'll try to just explain kind of in a simple way first, and then we'll meditate a little bit, and then maybe I'll explain a little bit more, and then we'll meditate a little bit more, and then I'll try to leave at least a long time for questions, sort of at the end. So. So there's many different ways to look at the, when we look at the emptiness of of anything, there's many different ways to approach it. But let's see. First of all, I guess I should say a little bit about why it's important, right? Which reminds me of another point I wanted to make, which is that it's really important whenever we're meditating, especially. Okay, so that reminds me of another point I thought that's left over from last session, which is that in relation to I think Kaisha's question, which was that, well, I was talking about how the importance of doing meditation session, at least 1 or 2 meditation sessions every day. But you'll find that, if you do, if you do meditation regularly, then you'll find that it changes the kind of attention that you have during the day, during normal activities during the day, right? So if you meditate regularly in the morning and in the evening, then you'll see that the way the way you're aware of yourself and your mind, the way you're aware of others, the kind of quality of attention you have in different situations, whether it be cooking or cleaning or working or traveling, it changes. It's different. It improves. You have generally a longer attention span. You're more able to focus your attention on specific things. You more quickly notice if you're distracted or you're excited, and different states of mind you become more perceptive to. So it's not just that we change our mind and change who we are as a person only during the meditation sessions, but it's during the meditation sessions that we focus exclusively on. Try to focus very precisely on what we're doing with our mind, but then through the force of that, then how we use our mind and how our mind kind of functions in other circumstances during the day, it changes. Again, that's similar to exercise. I think if you exercise for 30 minutes every day, then probably you find the way your body feels, the way your body works, the way you relate to it, the way you use your body, it changes. So then even when you're doing ordinary activities, you use your body slightly differently. So that's one thing. And then, another thing I thought to mention is important is whenever we're meditating, especially when we're doing analytical meditation. So you'll notice in many of the meditations we're doing together, I've been asking you questions, right? Open-ended questions. I mean, try to ask questions in a way that, it's really up to you to find an answer to a question. So that's very important, especially when we're doing analytical meditation, to ask questions in an authentic way, which means that we don't have foregone conclusions that we're just kind kind of finding a way to make ourselves arrive at, right? Because that would be just more like brainwashing. So, like when, ask a simple question we asked before was, um, well, to look at our mind, our mental consciousness, and see, is it changing moment by moment? And then a related question would be, is there anything that remains unchanging from moment to moment with our mental consciousness? So, of course, before we did that meditation, I was explaining to you for almost an hour about how the mental consciousness is impermanent and changing moment to moment, right? But even though that's the case, right, you shouldn't, because of that, when we ask the question to ourselves, we have to be careful not to just assume that what someone said is true, whether it be in a book or whether it be someone leading a course like me, or whether it be whatever, you saw something, heard someone really important or famous say it. We shouldn't assume things are true and then when we're meditating just take that for granted, but rather we need to approach questions with an open mind to really since. So like take this example, when we're looking at our mind and see, well, maybe a more interesting question is, which is not so clear, is there any thought or perception that is continually present in our awareness, right? When I was explaining about how the mind is clear and knowing, then the clear aspect, well, one way of interpreting that is to say that there's no thought or perception or appearance that is continually, appearing to the mind. It's continually in the face of the mind. So is that true or not? We need to ask. But when we ask that, we need to really just look at our own experience to see what is the case, rather than just assume, oh, well, he said there is nothing, so there must not be. If we do that, then we don't really come to a kind of a real wisdom, from our own side, a real understanding from our own side. We're just kind of mimicking words or things that someone else said, right? So to come to real, we want to, the point of any, part of any spiritual practice and any kind of wisdom practice of any wisdom tradition, you could say. And so definitely the part of Buddhist practice is that there's the fundamental assertion that the reason we suffer basically is because the way we view the world is in disharmony with reality, right, with the truth. So as a way to reduce suffering, we need to bring our view of the world into harmony with reality, with truth, right? So our real responsibility is to find the truth in the end, whatever that might be. And sometimes that might really be in contrast to things we've believed for a long time, right? And it might be in dramatic contrast to people whom we've trusted or people we've assumed were right for a long time, and then we find they're really not. No? So, but it's really important to keep that as our foremost kind of standard, or I don't know how you say, like a principle, is that we really need to find out what's true, like in the end, and not just find things that we can believe in that make us feel good, right? Because because ultimately, if we know what's true, and then we see the world and we live in according to that, that will bring well-being and happiness. Right? Yeah. So then, okay. So then, yeah, there's different ways to approach. Okay. So why meditate on the ultimate nature of the mind or of the person, right? Because that is the most fundamental truth. We need to understand what's most fundamentally the true kind of nature of how our mind exists, how as a person, how we exist. And especially it's because it's by grasping at things existing, by grasping at things existing in a way in which they don't actually exist, right? So having a false view, having a false apprehension, a mistaken apprehension of the way that things exist, then based on that, we come to a lot of wrong conclusions, and then we have unrealistic expectations, and then we experience just disappointment again and again. And also we falsely justify harmful actions, and then we create negative karma, and then that causes us to suffer as well. So the main way is that, I've mentioned before that all of our afflictive emotions, we can divide roughly into two types, right? Either those that are more on the side of being attracted to something, so when we see something as very pleasant, as very desirable, as very beautiful or attractive, or desirable, like a good reputation, or like having wealth, having power, things that are desirable, having control over things or other people, and so forth. So something we see as desirable and we crave it, right? So some afflictive emotions are on that side of the scale. So those include like jealousy, greed, lust, pride, arrogance and pride. Those are all inside of seeing something as attractive and wanting it. And then other afflictive emotions are on the opposite side of the scale. Whereas we see an object, could be ourselves or another person or an inanimate object. So we see something as unattractive, as repulsive or ugly, and then we have aversion towards it. Right? We want to be, instead of the opposite of desiring it and wanting to possess it, we want to destroy it and get rid of it and push it away, right? So on the things we see as attractive, we want to draw them towards us. We want to pull them in, possess them. Things we see as unattractive, we want to push away and destroy and get rid of, eliminate, right? Or be apart from. So afflictive emotions on the later side are like anger, hatred, irritation, maybe being spite, vengeance, those kind of things. So all of our afflictive emotions, they all have this kind of, either we're pulling, we see something attractive and we're pulling, or we see something unattractive and we're pushing it away. It's either a pushing or a pulling kind of function that they have, mostly, right? So so you can see at the root of these, there is some kind of judgment of something as attractive or something as unattractive, right? And that is very relative, right? What is attractive, what is unattractive? It's a very relative thing. So when someone asks us, like, is this attractive or is this unattractive or what? Then we automatically, we can see that we make, if we just go ahead and give an answer, we make that judgment in relation to ourselves, what we think, right? What we feel. So at the root of this attachment on the one hand, or anger and aversion on the other hand, is a grasping at ourself, right? A kind of self. And you see, when these afflicted the afflicted kind of attachment to some things and aversion to other things, the way it perceives, it perceives the afflicted attachment, perceives an object as attractive, but it appears as if the attractiveness of the object exists from the side of the object. Right? That the thing that we see as attractive, that attractiveness is not our opinion. It's not a projection that we put on the object, but rather the attractiveness of the things that we are attached to. It seems like the attractiveness is from the side of the object. Like they really are inherently attractive from their side. And the same with the things that we are averse to, right? The objects that we see, like think of a person that we don't like, or even a physical sensation that we don't like. It seems like the ugliness of that, the repulsiveness of that object that we're averse to, that we don't like, that the ugliness of it is on the object. It's a property of the object. It's not something coming from the side of our mind, which is false, right? So at a kind of basis for either this attachment or aversion is judgments that we make, right? But then we make a judgment about, oh, this is attractive, this is unattractive. We make that judgment, and then we project that onto the object, and then it appears as if those qualities, being attractive or unattractive, exist from the side of the object, whereas actually those came from the side of our mind. Right? And then, as a kind of go to a step deeper, is that at the very center of something attractive and something unattractive is this grasping at self. Assumption, right? A self that has a concrete existence, right? It has this, like, we exaggerate the reality of the self. That this self, this person, I, who is labeling some things as attractive and other things as unattractive, that we just assume that I has a kind of concrete reality from its own side. It's kind of a given entity in the universe. What do you say? It's not a dependent horizon, basically. It's not something that exists in dependence upon our mind, right? Just like things being attractive, just like attachment views things that it sees as attractive as not being attractive in dependence upon our mind, but being attractive from the side of the object, right? And when we're angry, averse to things, and they appear as very ugly or repulsive to us, again, it doesn't seem that repulsiveness is a product of our mind. It seems like it exists from the side of the object, right? Which is false. Similarly, it seems to us like the person who thinks that some things are attractive and other things are repulsive, that person also exists from the side of the object, which here is the person, right? Without depending upon mind, a mind labeling the person, right? So in short, just like we label some things as attractive, and then they appear back to us as attractive from their own side, when they're not, in fact. And we label other things as repulsive, and they appear back to us as if they are repulsive from their own side, but in fact they're not. We also label us, ourselves, as existing, as a person, from our own side, without depending upon our mind, which labels person, right? Which is false, right? So the last one, that third one, is a little more difficult to see. So why is it not true that we do not exist from our own side as a person? Yeah, so you can see I'm going to the analysis of person first before the mind. We'll come back to the mind later. So so how do we exist as a person, right? Like I was saying earlier, we have parts. Well, first of all, before we get to the parts, let me just, because we were talking a lot about causes and conditions. We're talking a lot about causes in the last session. So first of all, as a person, I don't know why my view keeps changing. As a person, we exist in dependence upon causes. Right? Actually, causes and conditions, you can say. So there's some primary causes, and then secondary causes, which we can call conditions. So, I mean, obvious cause of us as a person is our parents. Like we're all born from our parents, right? And then, like I was saying yesterday, you know, before the moment of conception, at the moment of conception, how are we born from our parents? Because, you know, one sperm cell from our father, one egg cell from our mother, they conjoin, and then our body starts to grow from those two cells. All the other cells of our body grow from those two cells. Right? That's one, you know, that's one way we're a product of our parents, and then, but we're also a product of. I was saying, where does our consciousness of this life, our stream of consciousness existing in this life, you know, from the time of conception until now, where did that come from, right? So, like I was saying, it's not something that came from either the sperm or the egg cell of our parents, right? Because those are physical things. Our consciousness is a non-physical thing. So where did the consciousness of this life come from? Had to have come from a moment of consciousness which immediately preceded the moment of conception, right? Of us in this life. So then that preceding moment of consciousness is also a cause of us, the person who exists in this life. And so, but then as we are, okay, let's kind of talk about, you know, the person who's born into this life. But then all of us, you know, several years have passed since we've been born. So, you know, we all speak a language, for example, you know, otherwise, yeah, we all speak English in this case here. So we're a person at this moment now, today, we're a person who knows how to speak English. So what are the causes of that? Well, all the instances of learning, you know, different words and grammar and, you know, learning English, or, you know, and whatever other language we speak, all of those are causes of this person who exists now, who knows how to speak English, another language. And then all of us now, we possess a body, right? So where did this body come from? Of course, like I said, it came from the sperm and egg of our parents, but the body that exists now, specifically, there's many other causes of it. All the breaths of air we've taken, you know, when we take air, we absorb oxygen into the blood, we exhale carbon dioxide. So all of that oxygen that we've been, you know, breathing in the last however many years, that's also all causes of our body in the way it exists now. Every meal we've enjoyed, all the food we've eaten, all the drinks we've you know, consumed, all of that stuff. Well, I don't know all of it. Some of it we excrete, right? Most of it we excrete, but all of that stuff has become part of our body at some time, right? So that's kind of, you can look at our physical, the story, like the causes of our physical body as it exists now. And because our body is part of us, then all those things which are causes of our body previous to now are also causes of us in the way we exist right now. And then look at our mind. So it's talking about language is more related to our mind. Because I mean, a lot of the concepts we have, the way we think about things, the way we interpret the world is largely related to the language that we speak. But you know, there's other, you know, other ideas, opinions, ideas. We have all the experiences we've had, all the conversations we've had with people, you know, previous to now in this life, are all causes of who we are right now as a person, right? So you can see it becomes quite clear that, you know, what we are right now as a person is actually something that's very complex, right? And it's something that has arisen, has come into existence in dependence upon many causes, right? And then each of those causes, they also have causes. Those are secondary causes of us, and then they also have causes, so those are causes of us. Just like, I mean, to look at it in a simple way, like just like our parents are causes of us, our grandparents are causes of our parents, right? Obviously. So our grandparents are causes of us. And then their parents, our great grandparents, they're causes of our grandparents. So then they're causes of us, and so on back to, the anatomically earliest humans, 250,000 to 300,000 years ago. And then on back. So the first, the earliest organisms on Earth are all causes of us. On back to the Big Bang. All the events and the things that happened at the Big Bang are all causes of us, of how we are now. If all those different chains of causation hadn't kind of unfolded in the way they did, then we wouldn't be who we are right now today, right? So we can see that, one way, well, this is one kind of dependent arising, right? We exist in dependence upon causes. And it's not like all those causes happened and then they produced what we are right now. And what we are right now is a static final result, right? Rather, what we are right now is also not fixed. We're continually changing. Each moment, we're slightly different than we were in the moment before, right? So if you look for, well, what am I, the person, well, what we were a few moments ago is not what we are now anymore, right? That has ceased to exist in the present. It exists, but it's something that's past. So it doesn't exist in the present. What we will be in 5 minutes from now, it has not yet come into existence, right? In the present, it's something that will happen, and we can't with any 100% certainty say what exactly that will be like, even just 5 minutes from now. So the way we exist right now, we look, but then it's like stepping into a river. As soon as the water is continually in a swift-flowing river, even a slow-flowing river, it's just not easy to see. The water is continually moving. So as soon as you step into the water, that river, already the water you just stepped into, it's moved downstream. So when we look at what we are as a person right now in the present moment, if we try to find a real person, the real essential I, all you find is a continually changing, unfolding collection of phenomena, right? So now we just want to focus on the changing part, right? Because we're impermanent. As a person, we're impermanent. Our mind is impermanent. Our body is impermanent. So we look for what we are right now, and you can't find anything that's fixed and unchanging. All you find is a continually changing phenomenon. So one kind of way we're dependent arising is that we are a result of products, and that process of causation is a continual, ongoing process. Then a second way we're kind of dependent arising is that, so this kind of analysis of looking at how we exist in dependence upon causes and conditions applies equally to us as a person and also to our mind. The second way that we're dependent arising is that we exist in dependence upon parts. Right? We exist in dependence upon parts. So how is that? Also, I've been alluding to it kind of all through sessions. Is that, well, okay, again, look at us as a person. What are we? We have a body and a mind, right? So is there any part of you as a person that is not included in your body or your mind? Like, I don't know, is your nose? Well, no, my nose is part of my body. My ears? No, they're also part of my body. What about my heartbeat? Part of my body still. What about our memories? Those are all part of our mind. What about our opinions? Very important. Huh? Those are all part of our mind as well. I mean, a good candidate might be like skills that we have. What about the skill to, I don't know, paint a house? Like I used to paint houses when I was in college. So what about the skill to paint a house? Where does that exist? Well, actually, that's not, yeah, that's a skill is a non-associated compositional factor. So that's not really clearly part of our body, part of my body or my mind, but it's part of, but it is part of me as a person. So, but that's okay. I mean, everything that is part of us as a person doesn't have to be part of our body or mind, but most things are. Um, mm. Yeah. Also, just I was saying, like the fact that we are impermanent. That's a quality of us. You know? We possess a quality of being permanent, of changing. So that fact also is part of us, right? But it's not specifically part of our body or part of our mind. It's a quality of us as a person. But that's okay. The main point is here is just to see that as a person, you know, what are we actually? So we're actually like, we have a lot of parts, right? There's all the different parts of our body. There's all the different parts of our mind. And so you can talk about, I mean, this is a little bit technical language, but it's not too difficult to understand. Any object that has parts, right? Then you can talk about the parts of that object. And then that object is the part possessor. So the parts of an object you're familiar with. The term part possessor, you're probably not familiar with. So it means like the thing that owns the parts, right? The thing that possesses parts. So let me do my mug again. I'm actually in a different room now. You might have noticed. I moved to a room where we have a battery. The electricity was off in the session. Now it just came on. But I found my mug. My mug is a part possessor. Right? Why? It has a handle, and it has this little knobby thing on top of the handle. It has nice different colors. It has a bottom, you know, otherwise the liquid in it would fall out. So it has a bottom. It has lip. It has a lip on the top. It has sides, you know, the side close to you, the side away from you, the left side, the right side. So all of those parts, the sides, the handle, the enamel, the bottom, the lip, those are all parts of the mug, right? And the mug, it has all of those parts. So the mug is the part possessor, right? And all those different parts of it are its parts. So there's a part possessor and the parts of the mug, right? So why is that important? Now I'll ask you the million-dollar question. Is this handle? Well, maybe I'll do it the other way first. Is the mug any of its parts? Right. So is this mug the handle? No, because the handle is something possessed by the mug. Right. Is the mug the bottom of the mug? No, because the mug, whatever is this mug, has to possess all of these parts. Right. The handle of the mug does not possess the lip or the bottom, for example, or the sides. The handle of the mug only is here, right? Whatever is the mug has to possess all the parts of the mug. So the handle is not the mug, the bottom is not the mug, the lip is not the mug. I have to be careful not to spill water in my laptop. The sides are not the mug, right? Because those are not possessors of all the parts. And also, so any of the parts, so in relation to any object, so this is true, this principle is true in relation to any basic, first of all, in Buddhist philosophy, I mean, there's different philosophical schools within Buddhism, but I'm explaining this according to the consequentialist middle way school. So that's the highest that basically in Tibetan Buddhism, all four schools accept. So anything that exists has parts, first of all. Everything that exists is composed of parts. Everything has parts. So now, I mean, in relation to the mug, I'm talking in terms of physical parts because it's very easy to understand. But even things that are non-physical, like consciousness, it's made up of parts. What kind of parts? Parts in time, right? Moments in time. Even permanent things have parts, but that's a little more complicated. We'll probably won't get to today. Oops, I forgot my watch. Keep track of time. Okay, so everything that exists has parts. So and that means everything that exists is a part possessor, right? It's a possessor of its parts. So what applies, what I'm telling you about the mug applies to anything that exists. So what's most important for us is us as a person and our mind. That's what we're about to meditate. But I'll just use the mug as an example because it's kind of handy. So the mug is a part possessor. It possesses all of these parts. So the mug is not any of those parts, right? It's not reducible to any one of those parts. And any of those individual parts are also not the mug, right? But yet, they are related to each other, right? They depend upon each other. If there is no mug, there are no parts of the mug, right? You cannot separate the mug and its parts, you know? And also, if there's no parts of the mug, then there's no mug. They mutually depend upon each other, like two sticks leaning against each other. So if you take away all the parts of the mug, you don't have a mug anymore, right? And if you don't have a mug, then if there's no mug, then something can't possibly be parts of that mug either. So then where is the actual mug? If this is not the mug, this is not the mug, this side is not the mug, this bottom is not the mug, this side is not the mug. I mean, then where is the mug? I mean, clearly the mug is in my hand. You know, when I use a referential point that's outside the basis, so you know, this is why it gets complicated. I was telling you. But when I refer to something that's not the mug, right? It's easy to locate. Like it's on top of my hand. It's in front of me. It's in front of the screen there. It's here. It's in this room. It's in this building. It's in South India. That's all easy. That's true. The mug is all those things. It's here. It's on my hand. But then when it gets difficult, and where it starts to break down our ordinary concepts, is when I analyze within the parts of the mug, right? So as long as I'm referring to things outside the mug, then it's easy to find. It's easy to locate. You know, in relation to the laptop lens or the camera, the mug is like in front of it. It's in front of me. It's on top of my hand. It's below the ceiling. When I refer to things outside the mug or the parts of the mug, it's easy to locate. But when I start to analyze more like in more fine-grained way, like within the parts of the mug, then it's very difficult to find. So it's the same with regard to us as a person. So think about, well, what are the parts of us as a person? Like I was saying, there's our body, all the different parts of our body, you know, our skin, our bones, our blood, our organs, our limbs, you know, our arms, our hands, our fingers, our fingernails, our, you know, our legs, our stomach, all the parts of our body, and, you know, down to the level of the cells, down to the level of the atoms and the subatomic particles. Those are quite easy. Okay, those are parts of us. Are you your body? No, because if you were your body, then you you wouldn't understand what we're talking about, because your body doesn't understand a language, for example. Your mind understands a language. You know, if you were your body, then you wouldn't think. You couldn't think. You couldn't make plans for the future. You couldn't have thoughts and opinions. You couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't use language. You couldn't do like reasoning. You wouldn't have feelings like happy and sad. You know, our body can feel good and feel comfortable and feel uncomfortable. But does your body feel happy or feel sad? No. Like when our mind feels happy or sad, we have physical feelings that are corollary with that. They go along with that. But it's not that the body feels happy or sad. So we're not our body. And then, are you your mind? Are we our mind? There's another question. That definitely seems more likely than being our body, right? It's a little bit more difficult to say no to that than it is to say no to the question, am I my body? So when we ask, am I my mind? Well, imagine, to answer the question, so this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. To really answer questions, you really have to go there, right? You really have to imagine, well, what would it be like if that was the case? So what would it be like if it was the case that we are our mind? If we imagine, if you were your mind, then what would that world be like? What would that mean? Right? What would that entail? So if we were our mind, and as I think as a lot of times as Western educated people, or I don't know, maybe just modern educated people, we tend to make things a lot more complicated than they actually are. I don't know if it's most people. I do for sure, but many people do. So sometimes we just have to try to think in a very simple way. So if we were our mind, then nobody could see us, right? Everywhere we go, we'd be invisible, right? Because can anybody see your mind? No. Also, can your mind hold a mug and drink from it? No. That requires a body. So as a person, we can do that, right? We can hold a mug and drink from it. We can play sports. We can, we can chop vegetables and wash dishes. Our mind is involved in all of those things. But if we were exclusively our mind alone, cannot do physical things, right? It cannot affect other physical things. So therefore, we're not our mind, right? For all those reasons. Also, if we were our body, or if we were our mind, then it would make no sense to talk about my body or my mind. Right? As soon as we talk about my body, there's a possessor and a possession, right? A thing, an owner and something owned. So when I talk about my body, it means we identify me as one thing, and my body is something I have, I possess, and that I can transform, I can act upon, I can use in different ways. And when we talk about my mind, it's the same. And that makes sense. Like the I who possesses a mind. And I can do different things, use that mind in different ways, my mug in different ways. If I was this mug, would it make any sense to talk about my mug? It'd be like talking about my me. Does that make sense to talk about my me? Not really, I don't think. So the point here is that as a person, we're made up of many different parts, right? We are not any of the one of the, we can grossly subsume the parts into parts of our body, parts of our mind. Our body is part of us, our mind is part of us. But we are not our body, we are not our mind. And yet, can we exist without those? If we take away our body and take away our mind, can we find something remaining that is us, the person? No, we can't. It'd be just like if you take away take away the handle, take away the enamel, take away this side and the bottom, take away the lip, take away all the clay. And then do you have something left that's a mug? No, it's all gone. As soon as all the parts of the thing are gone, then the part possessor also does not remain, right? So similarly with all the parts of us as a person, if we take away all the parts of us as a person, like throw them in the next room, there's nothing that remains that you can find that is the person, right? And yet, so yeah. So then So we are none of those parts. None of those parts are us. And we depend upon, for our existence, we depend upon all those parts. And all those parts to be part of us, they depend upon the existence of us, the person. So what does that mean? So how does the person actually exist, right? So all of this kind of analysis, talking about the causes and conditions, talking about all the parts, the whole point of all this analysis is to try to start to break down our idea of what we are, right? To show that what we are as a person is not something nearly so simple and straightforward as we ordinarily assume, right? It's not that, and it's not, especially, it's not that there's this concrete, unchanging entity that is I, right? That exists from its own side, right? Rather, first of all, it's, as a person, we exist in dependence upon many causes, and we're continually in a process of transformation, of causation and change. Secondly, when we look for what this real person is, all we find is all these different parts, none of which are the person. And now we come to the third kind of dependence. So we've talked about dependence upon causes, dependence upon parts. Now the third kind of dependence. So this is the most subtle, a little bit more difficult to understand. So dependence upon mental imputation, right? So we exist in dependence upon mental imputation, or another synonym for that term, mental imputation. So mental means by the mind. Imputation means we impute. So what does it mean to impute? It means we give a name to. We name, either like a verbal name, but also just when we think about something conceptually, we name it, right? So even if, imagine like I was the first guy in the world to ever make a mug, right? I was the first kind of caveman to come up with this idea that, oh, what if I just take clay from the ground and I make it into this bowl shape and put a handle on it and then throw it in the fire for a while, then I can put water in it, and it's so much easier than drinking out of my hand. Like, just imagine for a second, I didn't create the mug, I didn't invent mugs, but just imagine there'd never been a mug in the world before. And then so imagine before that I created this object, like a mug, but before I ever gave the name, imagine I didn't think of a name for it yet. I just recognized that this is kind of a new kind of object that's never existed before. So even when I have that thought that, oh, this is this kind of thing. This is like clay that I've taken and shaped into a bowl shape, and now I'm going to use to drink water out of it. As soon as I have that kind of label in my mind, then mug has come into existence apart from the name, right? It doesn't matter what kind of name you give to that object. As soon as the concept of that has evolved, has been developed, then that object exists, right? Assuming, it is a real object, right? So in this case, it's a real object. So that's what we mean by mental imputation, is like conceptually, another way is to say conceptual, or labeling with concepts. That's labeling by concepts is a synonym. So what we mean is, with a conceptual mind, we impute, oh, this is this, upon a collection of parts, right? So remember, the mug is a collection of parts, and then upon that, so how does the mug exist? That's what I'm coming to. It has all these parts. It depends upon all these parts. How does it depend upon the parts? The parts are called a basis of imputation. Right? So this is a very important term, basis of imputation. So remember, how does the mug exist? It exists as, or it exists in dependence upon mental imputation. So how does that process of mental imputation work? First, there has to be a basis upon which we impute something, right? So the basis for imputation of the mug is the collection of parts of the mug, right? If I take, say like I take this, this is my conduit to you all, actually. This is my Android phone. So if I take this, and This is not a mug, obviously, right? I cannot put liquid in it. If I try to, I'm going to destroy it, right? So this thing is not a basis of imputation for a mug. Why? Because it cannot function as a mug. It doesn't function as a mug. So to be the basis of imputation of the mug, it has to be a collection of parts that have the ability to function as a mug, right? So this collection of parts, the handle and the sides, the bottom, the lip, the enamel, this collection of different parts, none of which is the mug, they possess the ability to function as a mug. So what's the function of a mug? It's something that can hold liquid and you can drink from, basically, right? So this collection of parts, they have the ability to function as a mug, and therefore they're a suitable basis of imputation for mug. Means when I label mug upon this thing, that's appropriate, right? And thereby mug does exist. So when I label mug upon this, it's not like when I label mug, mug exists, but I mean, mug exists as something which is labeled upon this collection of parts. Not in any more concrete way than that. If I take this object and I label mug, because mug has a meaning. It has a meaning in society, in the world. We all know what mug means. It's not just like labeling, woogie woo, something like that. Like mug has a meaning. Right? So if I take this object and I label mug upon it, does this become a mug? No, because this thing cannot function as a mug, right? So then how do we exist as a person? So relate that back to us as a person. Check the time. Oh yeah, okay. So relate that back to us as a person. Then, okay. So remember, how do we exist as a person? Basically, we also, just like the mug, we have a collection of parts. All the parts of our body, all the parts of our mind, and all those parts are changing every moment. And then upon these parts, we label I. Me, I. Not I, the person. Okay? I mean, not I like your organ, the eyes, but we label I, capital I in English. So, so upon the collection of parts of us as a person, we label I. And thereby we exist. That's how we exist. When you search for this I, and do we exist? Yes, of course we exist. Nobody's saying we don't exist. If we don't exist, then we're not here. Who's talking? Who's listening? Who's thinking about this question at all? When you're meditating, if you have a doubt about whether you exist, just ask, well, who's meditating if I don't exist? Okay. We exist, no question. But the question is, how do we exist? Right? So we want to compare, when we're meditating, we compare the way we ordinarily seem to exist in our day-to-day, lives, when we're not analyzing how we exist, right? When we're not asking the question, how do I actually exist? And especially when we ordinarily experience all different afflictive emotions. There's, seeing some things as attractive and desiring them and having attachment. Seeing other things as repulsive and being averse to them, right? So especially at that time, the way we seem to exist is very concrete, real, just there's this unquestioning kind of reality from the side of us, the person, we're there, There's a sense of true existence, means existing from the side of the person, I itself, without depending upon anything else. That's the way we ordinarily seem to exist, so ourselves. So again, this is a big question. You need to ask yourself, is this true or not? And check your own experience. Right? So we're going to do that in just a minute. So we compare that kind of the way we ordinarily perceive ourselves to exist versus when we analyze. When we analyze to see how I exist in dependence upon causes and how I'm changing from moment to moment. When we analyze to see how I exist in dependence upon many parts, none of those parts are me, and I'm not any of those parts, right? Another kind of analysis. And then this last analysis, the third one, when we analyze to see how we exist as something which is labeled by the mind upon this collection of parts, right? So this collection, all the parts of our body, all the parts of our mind, all the different facets of us as a person, our character, our memory, our dreams, our plans, our experiences, our feelings, all of those parts are part of us as a person. And upon that whole collection of all the parts that make us up, all the different, qualities and aspects of us, we label person, right? And that's how we exist. But we'll try. So we can search through that whole collection of parts. If we have some more concrete existence than that, if we exist in some more concrete way than that, then when we search for the real I, who is meditating, who is living, who has lived many years, who is existing now, who plans to, do things tomorrow and in the future, if we exist in some more concrete way than something merely imputed upon our collection of parts, then when we search for that real I, the concrete I, the fundamental, truly existent I, we should be able to find something, right? So we'll check. That's what we do. So the technique, and when we meditate, so we do the same analysis with regard to our mind, right? We try to look at the way that our mind ordinarily seems to exist. We'll do that a little later if we get time. Yeah, we should get time, I think, but maybe just very short. But we do the same analysis with regard to the mind. We look at the way, with regard to the person or the mind, the process is like this. First, and this is the most difficult step, is the first step. We look at the way, we try to get a very clear sense of how we ordinarily seem to exist to ourselves. That's the first step. Then, the second step, we think, okay, recognize, well, I'm made up of many parts. So if I exist in the way I ordinarily seem to, as this concrete, unified thing, a singular, unified thing, that does not depend upon anything else, right? So the first step is identifying. It's called identifying the object of negation. That basically means identifying the way we ordinarily, intrinsically or innately seem to exist to ourselves. So that is as something that does not depend upon anything else, but it has its own reality from its own side, right? Remember, as examples of this, just like when we see some food, I find food very, very useful because I like delicious food. So for example, when we see anything as attractive, so say some food, it seems like the attractiveness of it exists from the side of the food that we like, of the object, right? So just like that, or similar to that, then the way we innately, ordinarily seem to exist to ourselves is as if we have kind of real existence from the side of us, the person, without depending upon concepts and mental imputation in our mind. So then, but if that's the case, then so the second step, either we are, let's see, well, either we are one of the parts of us as a person, right? We're part of our body and mind, or we're separate from them, right? And then we look, are we any of the parts of our body and mind? We look within, we say, no, we're not. And then do we exist totally independently and separately from the parts of the body and mind? And no, we also don't. So that's kind of the analysis, right? So again, there's these 4 steps. First, the first step is called identifying the object of negation, but it means identifying the way we ordinarily seem to exist ourselves. The second is recognizing that if we do exist as this kind of independent thing, or an inherently existent thing, then we either exist as separate from our body and mind, or as part of, or separate from the parts that make us up, separate from our constituent parts, or as somehow part of our constituent parts, one of, or the collection of. our constituent parts. And then we analyze each of those. So in the third step, we look, are we any of the parts of us as a person? Am I any of the parts of my body? Am I any of the parts of my mind? Are I or am I any of the other characteristic things that make me up as a person? You see, no. And then the fourth step is, do I somehow exist separately and independently from my body and mind and all the other parts that make me up? And you can see, no. Thereby, we have to conclude that the way we seem to exist in the first step is completely false. We don't exist that way at all. Okay, so I'm sure you have some questions, but before you ask, let's try, right? Let's do a little meditation, and then you can ask questions, right? Oftentimes when we have questions, they're just kind of intellectual. Not that that's the case with you all now, but you know, oftentimes when we intellectualize about things, we come up with a lot of questions. But when we just try something, we get a little, it's like baking a cake. You know, if someone explains to you how to bake a cake, you might have a lot of questions, but it's probably better you just try first, and then later your questions will be much better informed. You'll have much better questions, more pragmatic questions. Okay, so get comfortable. Right? Relax your mind a little bit first. Relax your body first. Don't squeeze things too hard, or you'll break something. And then get comfortable in your meditation posture in space. And take a few deep breaths, relax. So bring your awareness to the present moment. So let's try this. So for the first step, in general, you know, whenever we experience an afflictive emotion, then the grasping at a solid I, is stronger than when we're not, right? Than when we have a positive state of mind or a neutral state of mind. And the stronger the afflictive emotion is, whether it be anger, attachment, any related afflictive emotion, the stronger the afflicted emotion is, the stronger the grasping that the I is, that the inherently existent I is. So therefore it's easier to identify how we ordinarily or how this concrete kind of sense of self appears. So let's try this. Try to think of a past experience when you felt attached to something, right? Not the most extreme form of attachment, but kind of middling, attached to a person, or you're going someplace, a certain set of plans maybe, or like a promotion, or um, you know, some praise, or even just something as simple as food or music or something. So just think of one, concrete example in the past where you felt quite obviously, very attached to something. So try to bring to mind very clearly the object that you were attached to, the thing you were attached to. Whether it has a visual aspect or not, just bring to mind very clearly the object that you were attached to. So imagine it exists, and try to put yourself in that moment again. Relive that experience of being strongly craving, strongly grasping, strongly desiring that object. Right? Try to kind of relive that experience. So now the trick is maintain that experience of desire and attachment, right? So try to leave that intact, but with a corner of your mind, like 20% of your mental energy, look at how you seem to exist, right? As a person, the person who is it that's attached to that object, and how does that person seem to exist? And especially, does that person who's experiencing attachment, do they seem to exist from their own side, by their own power? Or do they seem to exist by depending upon other things, which are not them, which is not that person, right? By causes and conditions and parts and mental imputation, right? So does the person who's feeling attachment in that moment, do they seem to exist by their own power, from their own side, independently? Or do they seem to exist, by depending upon other things, causes and conditions, parts and mental imputation? Mm. So it's very important if you start to lose a sense of what this person, self that you're looking for, then just go back to the very first step and try to regenerate. Um, think about the object of attachment you're thinking about in this case, and try to regenerate that sense of strong attachment, without analyzing anything else. And then naturally that sense of self will arise more strongly. And then again, with the corner of the mind, look at it to see how it appears to exist. So why don't we do that now? Try to go back to the very first instruction. Think of the thing again you're strongly attached to, and visualize it very strongly, very clearly, right in front of you. Again, try to put yourself in that moment of craving, being very attracted to, craving very strongly. So then, if that I, is feeling attachment very strongly, if it exists in the way it appears, we should be able to find it, either within the parts of us as a person, our body and mind, or outside. So first, look through all the parts of your body. Right? So can you find this I, this feeling, attachment to some object very strongly? Can you find it, or does it exist in any parts of the body? So look through all the parts of your body, from the top to the bottom, or the bottom to the top, or however you want. Does it exist in the skull, in the brain, in the chest, in the tissues, in the skin, in the cells? Mm. And a little bit more, a little slightly different question is, are any of the parts of the body that person? And then look at the mind. Are any of the parts of our mind that person who feels attachment, who's feeling attachment for that object? So again, if you lose a sense of what you're looking for, go back to the very first step. Imagine yourself in that situation, being very attached to something. Regenerate the sense of I, and then continue looking for it. But now that I, does it exist as any of the parts of our mind? So look through all the different parts of your mental experience, your sense consciousness, your mental consciousness, the present moment of mind, past moments of mind, feelings, thoughts, plans, memories, so forth. Mhm. And then finally, imagine this. So this is the fourth step. Yeah. If we take away our body and mind, so imagine putting our body and our mind and all the parts of us as a person off to one side, like throw them all in the next room, so to speak. Then can we find us, the person, this person who is feeling attached? Is there anything that remains that we can point to and say, this is I? Right, so completely separate from. Imagine we separate out all the parts of our body, we separate out all the parts of our mind, and any of the other parts that we possess, that are part of us as a person. So put those all off to one side. And then on the other side, completely independent from those, separate from those, can we find anything to point to and say, this is I, the person? Mm. Okay, so relax your attention there. Mm. And then, now, if you have any questions, I'll try to answer. Mm. Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
How do you say your name? Anita?
Agniya.
Adenia.
Agniya.
Agnia. Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean fire, does it? Agni means fire in Sanskrit.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Mm.
so basically, my question is about something you said yesterday. Yesterday you said that sometimes you do water fasting. So I'm wondering, how does water fast or generally any kind of fasting affect the meditation and the mind? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Um, I mean, I can speak a little bit from my own experience, but it's not really. I mean, yeah. What do I say? It's not typically part of the Buddhist teachings. What I should say. I mean, in like traditional Buddhist teachings, there are several instances where fasting is used. Like there's a practice called nunges. Um, but the purpose of fasting there is not really like for cleansing or something. It's more for to experience, to voluntarily experience the sufferings of hunger and thirst, and thereby more easily generate compassion for other beings who experience hunger and thirst. Is probably the main reason in that context. And then there is another instance of fasting in the sort of in relation to primarily like tantric meditation. But there it seems, well, yeah, I haven't studied about that very much, but yeah. But I mean, the typically the reason for that at that time is explained to be so that one doesn't have to go around in search of food. So one saves time, basically. So one doesn't have to spend a lot of time preparing food. But clearly, one of the benefits of fasting in relation to meditation is that we free up a lot of energy in our body to use for our mind, because digesting food, it takes up a lot of energy, right? Like you can see after you eat a big meal, if you eat too much at a meal, you eat a lot, then your stomach is really full, and then your body sends a lot of blood. A lot of blood goes to your stomach and your kind of intestinal area to digest food. So it takes a lot of energy to digest the food, and so we become lethargic, like really lethargic during that time while we're digesting. So it's I mean, the Buddha recommended like don't first of all let's say, I mean, the Buddha gave a lot of advice about eating and health and sleep. So about eating, for example, in relation to this digesting, I think the Buddha said um, that imagine like the amount of food we can have is like three parts, like three fistfuls, sort of food that we can that the capacity of our stomach, I should say. So imagine the capacity of our stomach has like three parts. In any meal, when we eat a meal, we should only fill two parts, right? So we should leave 1/3 of the stomach empty in order to digest. So that's very good, just practical advice. I mean, I mean, the Buddha also taught that one of the main causes of illness is undigested food. And one of the causes of having undigested food in our system is because we eat too much and then we can't digest the food we've already eaten. So, but to specifically answer your question, like in my own experience, yeah, I find by doing like water fasting, yeah, the mind becomes quite a lot more clear during that time because you do free up energy. And also, I mean, it can be that during the time you're actually fasting, sometimes you feel really weak. And so then the mind can become more unclear, right? When you feel really weak, but other times you don't. Um, but also, it kind of the energy in the body, like the prana or the subtle energy that flows through the body, it becomes more kind of light. It flows more easily. So you can be more alert. People can be more alert. And you save a lot of time, but that's not the main point. Really. Um, and Yeah, I don't know. For me, I find somehow the mind becomes seems a little bit more supple, a little bit more flexible. So can think about things, I mean, and experience things a little bit more deeply at times, while you're fasting. And it's also a little bit similar to being sick. When you have a fever or you become weak with sickness, it can be a little bit easier to generate like compassion or have empathy for other people because you yourself are suffering. So I think fasting for me also has that kind of aspect at times that when we feel really healthy and full of energy, like full of physical energy and strong, that can easily lead to having a little bit of arrogance and a little bit of sense of control and power that is false, right? It's not actual reality. Whereas when we feel, just even when we're not fasting, when we just feel sick and weak, we suddenly are faced with the reality of our powerlessness, and that can be very beneficial for our mind. So fasting also, it can kind of put one in that kind of situation also. But generally, yeah, I mean, the Buddha didn't, I haven't seen where the Buddha taught to do, like fasting over multiple days, right? But I mean, the Buddha did teach, I mean, for ordained followers of the Buddha, monks and nuns, they're only supposed to eat between sunrise and noon, right? So that means they're only supposed to eat basically during 6 hours of the day, or maybe 7 hours of the day. So that means naturally, if they follow that discipline strictly, then they're fasting basically from noon until sunrise the following morning. Right?
Tenzin, I did that for 6 months when I lived with a forest tradition in Thailand. We got up at 4 o'clock, prayers at 4:30, and we ate twice in the morning before noon.
Yeah. In Thailand, they follow that very strictly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But the forest tradition are much stricter. They don't eat any meat or anything. The normal monks eat meat, fish, and everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'd recommend it. I mean, I think it's good to try if you do it in a safe way. So, other questions?
Thank
Well, did any of you find your I in your body or your mind or somewhere else? I mean, yeah, a lot. I mean, did you have some doubt about, well, maybe this is the real I that I'm looking for? Typically, I mean, many people, there's some, I always say, kind of good candidates. There's some things that it often kind of looks like, oh, maybe this is the real kind of essential I. For example, the stream of consciousness, the continuum of consciousness that is always present. That's quite a one that we often kind of cling to as being the real kind of I, the essential I, the person. But I don't know. Did you have any other? I mean, could you follow the meditation? Was that clear? Because if you have never done it before, this kind of meditation, I mean, that specific kind of meditation method, it's not easy to follow, because at each of the steps, there's a lot of different questions that can come up. So one can easily kind of start to feel lost and like you don't know what you're doing. So that's kind of what I want to clear up. If you have those kind of questions about like, well, was I doing it right? Or, in this first step, I didn't have any kind of clear appearance of the I. Or in the second step, what do I do? And so forth. So, I mean, to remind you, like in the first step, we looked at, tried to, I mean, recall clearly an instance of feeling strongly attached to something, right? An instance of strongly feeling attachment to something that we perceive as very attractive. So first we visualize the thing we perceive as very attractive, and then we try to kind of relive that experience of being very, fascinated with that, very drawn to that, very attracted to that. And then with a corner of the mind, we try to observe, well, who is this I that is attached to that object? So, in that book, actually, I was kind of talking about this morning, the meditation on the nature of the mind. He recommends there that for different people, the way they try to elicit the sense of the I, grasping at an inherently existent I, is different, right? So for people who they're predominantly beset with attachment, then yeah, they use attachment that we were using. But for people who they have more of a propensity to feel angry about different things, then they use anger instead. They think of an object of anger. For another person who's very arrogant and very proud, then they use pride, right? They think of their own pride, and then try to kind of bring to mind that feeling of very arrogant pride, and then from within that identify how the I appears to exist. Or maybe for some, okay, Meyer, oh, you have to unmute yourself first. Can you unmute yourself?
Just in relation to that, I have another question, which is maybe tied, but so I guess I mean, I was trying to have anger as a focus of the meditation, but because I believe that I'm attached to that, or I was attached to it in this episode, and is that true? So we can, I'm just asking, is it possible to be attached to your anger then, or to another emotion, you know?
Is it possible to be attached to an emotion? Yeah, I think so. In the sense that you know, it's like a companion for you, that you're so accustomed to using that emotion or reacting with that emotion in different circumstances, that it feels kind of scary to imagine not having that emotion, not feeling that way. I think, you know, when we talk about being attached to an emotion, it's kind of a codependent relationship, right? Where we know it's maybe not good, but it also would feel totally disorienting to imagine not having that. Like as if we feel like that emotion is so integral to who we are as a person, to how we recognize ourselves, as, you know, how we identify ourselves as a person, that it can seem scary to imagine not being that person anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know, when we're doing this specific meditation, I think to try to focus on being attached to an emotion, it brings a whole level of complexity to it that maybe it's just makes it more difficult. You know? So I would try to simplify it. And if you do have anger, you know, anger is kind of an issue for you, just simply try to relive an experience when you felt angry about something, right? And then from within that experience of feeling angry, try to have this self-reflexive corner of the mind, look back to see, well, who is that person that feels angry? How do they appear to exist, right? And then do the analysis. Are they anywhere within the body? Are they anywhere within the mind? Do they exist separately from the body and the mind? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There seem to be a lot of people from England in this group. Is that the case? Are you in England, Meyer?
Croatia, but Scottish, yes.
Oh, you're Scottish.
As is David Hume.
As is David, yeah, I know, David Hume, yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a supplementary question, which is really about is to ask for some advice, and it follows on from what you said, where you were starting with yesterday about your own biography. And for me, as somebody who makes cups, your examples are very fitting and fits well with me. But you know, I think of myself as I've some academic background, so I'm not you know, anti-intellectual, but I'm somebody who's come to realize how much making and being embodied in the skill of making and in doing is really important. And so my preference or tendency in terms of practice and moving forward on the path is to be more embodied and perhaps to question less. And so my request for advice relates to how to move forward in a way that and I guess in a way you can't answer this, but I need to find something that sits well with me, or I think sits well with me.
Yeah.
And just to ask about the role of this form of questioning or analytical meditation with it, you know, for somebody like me, and I guess at one point like you, when, you know, in your past, you know, when you were younger, I kind of thought, oh, maybe a more embodied approach is more useful. I don't know. It's just really to ask what to get some
Which
guidance.
part of my biography were you referring to?
Well, just when you were talking about when you were feeling lost, and you said, "Oh, maybe I'll be a sculptor," and so there.
Oh yeah.
Or an architect. So there was a sense of you. You know, I guess you had an idea of yourself as somebody who might behave. You know, approach life in a physical way as opposed to a physically creative way.
Yeah. I mean, I still really. I mean, yeah. I guess in the environment I'm in now, I'm in a monastic university, right? So we're studying, and I still find it really difficult to be too intellectual sometimes. And so when I finish an exam, I like to go out in the garden and pull weeds and just like do something physical every day. Actually, I need to go. I study for like in an hour usually. I study for 45 minutes, and then I need to go outside and walk around for like 15 minutes, just to kind of be grounded and relaxed. It's typical. So yeah, I mean that's not uncommon. But I mean, one of the wonderful things I think about this Nalanda tradition of Buddhism, as it's preserved in the Tibetan society, in this Tibetan lineage, is that there's so many different kinds of practices, right? So there's really something that appeals to every aspect of our sort of persona. So it's true that like this, especially this kind of meditation we're just doing, is one of the most intellectual, the most dry, analytical. But we don't have to. And so because there's many different kinds of practices. For example, there's a practice of making tsatsas. I don't know, have you heard of the practice of making tsatsas? So it's a practice where you take, the typical is earth tsatsas. So you take clay, or these days people use cement powder, but you take earth and you shape it into an image of a Buddha, little statues of Buddha, and then there's a meditation practice and a visualization that goes with it. But it's a very physical, activity of taking, earth and shaping it into an image that we have reverence for, and that symbolizes something very meaningful to us. And then there's another practice of like offering water bowls every morning. So each morning on our altar, offering water. So it's another way of using the element of water to create merit. And then, I mean, one of my favorite practices is doing long prostrations, which I've done a lot of. It's a kind of purification practice where you prostrate, make a full prostration, means you spread yourself fully prone on the ground as an expression of homage, and you visualize like a whole bunch of Buddhas before you, and then recite their names as a way of reducing your pride and also creating merit. So it's a very physical practice. If you ever get a chance, it'd be great if you can go to Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha achieved enlightenment in India, and you see, there's the whole area around. There's a big stupa in the center. Have you been?
No, but I've seen some YouTube of people prostrating there, and the marks on the floor on the.
Oh yeah, yeah. So there's a whole.
Tenzin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a big stupa in the middle. And then,
yeah.
Okay. So and then there's a whole like park area around. Okay, that's great.
I did 3 full-length prostrations around the stupa.
Okay, next time you go, do more. So yeah, but it's a very you're using your entire body, you're using all your physical energy as an expression of different aspects of your spiritual practice. That one is usually mostly confession. We're remembering negative things we've done in the past, and as a way of purifying it, making prostration. So in short, I would say, yeah, follow your heart, follow your whim, kind of find different kinds of practices that appeal to you, and yeah, if you kind of feel too things. I mean, we do have a tendency to over-intellectualize often. I mean, that can be a big problem, and so we don't want to do that. So can come back to, but another practice is more like compassion. like meditation on loving kindness we're doing to generate a positive motivation at the beginning is not very intellectual. It more connects us with our heart, opens our heart, and helps us just connect with other people in an emotional way, right? Instead of an intellectual way. That can be very helpful. So, do you have any of the cups you're making nearby? Can you hold up?
I sold them all. I gave up actually at the end of the year and came to Croatia, and I sold them all. So
Okay.
some somewhere, not to hand.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, next time.
Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome. Yeah, okay, where's Case? There's a question. Can you unmute yourself, Case?
This is a question a little bit related to the Dzogchen practice, but we're in the area now, I guess, with this last meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's trying to understand the concept of the first of the three words of Garab Dorje, the Tawa. We talked about observing the observer.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, observing the observer is still manifesting a thought. This is still a production of my mind, which is not the primordial view. Is this a correct way of interpreting?
Well, first of all, Dzogchen is quite out of my league. So I can't say anything like, or I haven't received any teachings on Dzogchen, actually. I've read a little bit, but I haven't received any teachings. And especially, the text of Garab Dorje, I'm not familiar with. But I think what I think your main question seems to be, when we're trying to observe the observer, it still seems to be a conceptual activity. So isn't that observer we're trying to observe, isn't that also just a projection of our mind? Is that your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true that when we're observing, typically, this comes back a little bit to what Paul and I were discussing. Paul was asking about yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we are trying to observe ourselves as a person, it is mostly conceptual. That's true. And so it's not that conceptual mind. Yeah, that's not like the bare kind of just nature of our mind, the pristine awareness, that would be talked about like in Dzogchen or Mahamudra text. Because maybe it would be helpful just to talk a little bit about the general strategy of, like, I think that's common between, I don't know, I almost hesitate to say Dzogchen, because Dzogchen is the pinnacle of the 9 jhanas, right? So what we're talking about, just identifying the pure nature of the mind, that comes way before Ati Yoga. Ati Yoga is the 9th, right? So that comes way before, actually. So it even comes in the sutra path we can talk about. The first 3 jhanas belong to the sutra path. There's the hero vehicle, the solitary realizer vehicle, and the bodhisattva vehicle. That's the first of the 3 of the 9 jhanas in the Lima system. So even in those 3, we can talk about identifying the pure nature of the mind, although it's true that method of trying to identify the most subtle level of the mind, really, it really belongs to Tantra, right? So the last 6 of the 9 jhanas are all Tantra. So the first 3 are the first 3 Tantras, Kriya, Charya, and Yoga Tantra. And so even during those, but especially then what is it? What's the 6th? The 7th one is, I don't remember maybe Anu Yoga Tantra, I think. I forget the terms for the last 3, but especially in Tantra, where the general strategy, the idea is that all of our afflictive emotions are more we can divide the mind into different levels of more coarse and subtle levels of mind, right? So there's more subtle levels of mind, down to a very most subtle level of a mind, which is called like pristine awareness, you can say, or innate, unborn kind of awareness. And then on the basis of that, we have more and more coarse levels of mind. So by nature, all of our disturbing emotions and also all of our conceptual minds, our concepts, all belong to these coarser levels of mind, right? And especially the ignorance, which is the fundamental cause of all of our afflictive emotions and thereby all of our karma, contaminated karma, and thereby all of our suffering, it belongs to these coarser levels of mind, right? It's never part of this underlying most subtle level of mind, which is pure from the very beginning, pure now, and always will always be pure, and which goes on to enlightenment. You know, that most subtle level of mind, which is what actually becomes the enlightened mind of a Buddha. So there are, I mean, on the one hand, we need to identify the way we falsely grasp at things. So in the Gelugpa tradition, Tsongkhapa especially emphasized that is a conceptual process, right? So it's not that all concepts are bad. Some concepts are correct, like correctly knowing something. We can have concepts that correctly know things, and we use those to counteract and reduce concepts that incorrectly know things, that are incorrectly grasp at things, I should say. So for example, when we see some, you know, some object of attachment, like some food as being, you know, the deliciousness of a food we're attached to as existing from the side of the object, then we can use, you know, a reason and concepts to see that actually that's not true. That our perception of something as attractive or delicious is mostly a projection from the side of our mind. And thereby we reduce this, right? We reduce this destructive concept, right? But we still have this correct concept. But it's true that gradually we have to transcend conceptuality, right?
Because
especially in
conceptuality is action, right? To conceptualize something is action.
Yeah, conceptuality is action.
Yeah.
It's active. Yeah.
And to release is non-action.
True, yeah. But the idea is that just to, if we just release without first, if we just abide in a state of non-action without first eliminating wrong concepts, those wrong concepts will just wait in a dormant state and then eventually come back again, right? So the method that's more emphasized in the Gelugpa system is you counteract the wrong concepts with correct concepts, right? Until you reduce or eliminate their power, and then those correct concepts you gradually transform into direct perceivers, basically, to a non-conceptual state. And then, well, basically, you have to generate. We need wisdom, right? We need wisdom knowing reality. So we first generate that wisdom conceptually, but then by practicing it again and again and again, we learn to bring that kind of correct knowledge into a non-conceptual state, basically. And then we see reality as it is, and then we don't need to do anything anymore. We just abide in awareness of it, right? So it's kind of an action leading to a sort of inaction. But the what do you say? The danger is seeing that if we just jump into inaction too soon, then there's still a lot of negative forces in our mind, which will eventually come to the surface again. Yeah. Seven. of the 8. You know, if you posit 8 main minds, then it would be the 7. And the function of it, right, the function of the storehouse consciousness in the Chittamatra system, right, is to provide the continuity to the person from life to life, right? So it's the consciousness that remains in an unbroken stream from life to life. And especially, it's called storehouse consciousness because it's the repository for all of the imprints, karma, especially when we engage in karmic actions, or the seeds for that will later produce the results of those karmic actions are all placed on that storehouse consciousness, right? So we need to provide a way for, you know, in this life, if I'm very generous or if I'm very like stingy, and I create, so sometimes I create karma of generosity, other times karma of being very stingy, then how is it that I experience the results of that karma in future lives, right? There has to be a method for connecting the two. So in the Chittamatra system, the method is the karmic seeds of those actions are put in the storehouse consciousness, and then that consciousness flows in an unbroken stream to future lives. And then when I meet with the appropriate conditions, those karmic seeds will ripen and produce experiences. So, but see, the difference is in the Chittamatra system, remember, Lama Tsongkhapa, his ultimate view is according to the consequentialist middle way system, or the Prasangika Madhyamaka view, right? And he has his own interpretation of what that view is in the different details. But the big difference between the Madhyamaka process, I don't know, are you more comfortable with the Sanskrit or the English terms?
English.
And I'll just throw out English terms, okay. So the middle way consequentialist school, the difference between them and all the other schools, so in this case, between them and the Chittamatra school, is that for the middle way consequentialist school, when you search for anything within its basis of imputation, you cannot find it, right? So specifically, when you search for the person, like the meditation we were just doing, when you look for the person within all the basis of imputation of the person, which is all of the parts of us, you cannot find any of the parts, none of the parts of the person. So that person is unfindable. It doesn't mean the person doesn't exist. It still exists, but it exists as almost like as an enigma, as a kind of thing which is a creation of the mind in a way, but not like a hallucination. It's something that's merely imputed upon an appropriate basis of imputation. So there's no more substantial existence than that. But for all the lower schools, so especially here for the Chittamatra school, that is too insubstantial. Like for them, like things have to have a more substantial kind of existence than that, right? So for the Chittamatra school, when you search for the person, you know, there is the person imputed upon the body and mind, but when you search for the actual person, you have to find something substantial that is the person. Otherwise, they feel like you cannot explain how karma works, how you create karmic seeds in one life and they ripen in another life. So for the Chittamatra, when you look, you know, if I was a Chittamatra person and I did the meditation we just did, then I would come to the conclusion that my stream of consciousness is me, right? Is the real me, right? So for the Chittamatra, that storehouse consciousness is the real basis of the person. That is, and you have to have something like that. So how does Lama Tsongkhapa then explain how karma works, right? That's his big challenge. So and this is quite a difficult aspect of the consequentialist middle way. So if you get rid of that seventh consciousness, the storehouse consciousness, you don't have that, then where are the seeds of karma planted, right? And how do they travel from life to life? So Tsongkhapa says the seeds of the karma are planted in the continuum of the mere person, right? So it's very intangible. So those seeds of karma exist basically as part of the continuum of the mere person. So there's a person imputed upon my body and mind, that person exists. And those seeds of karma basically exist as part of the continuum of that person. and they don't need any more substantial basis than that, right? Basically, yeah, it's like that. Although you could add also, I mean, because the mental consciousness also does flow from life to life, right? In the middle way, a consequentialist school, that sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness, that also flows from life to life. So even for a school like the, I'm about to run over time. Even for a school like the autonomous middle way school, like the autonomous middle way school, and someone like Haribhadra, they don't, yeah, I think doesn't, yeah, Haribhadra, I think, does not accept the seventh and eighth consciousness posited by the mind-only school. But he'll posit as that sixth consciousness, the stream of consciousness that flows from life to life, that is the real person. And the karmic imprints rest on that, right? So even if you don't go as far in rejecting a findable things as Tsongkhapa does, you can still find other ways to explain, to account for that functionality of the storehouse consciousness without a storehouse consciousness. Right? So just to summarize, so for the Chittamatra, the main function of the storehouse consciousness is to act as a receptacle and a conveyor for imprints of karma from life to life. But for the consequentialist middle way school, the merely imputed person serves that function, right? That's the main thing.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we're almost out of time, so I shouldn't take any more questions. Okay, I'll take one more. Charu, you want to ask your question?
Yeah. I have one question. The thing is that this, you spoke of pristine awareness. So is this pristine awareness and the stream of consciousness connected?
Yes, very much. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so, yeah. Well, we can think like, as far as stream of consciousness, I mean, actually, stream of consciousness, we think of like, one stream of awareness just going from life to life. So clearly, why does it have to be a mental consciousness? Because our sense consciousness, they don't flow in an unbroken stream from life to life, because they don't even flow in an unbroken stream from one day to the next. Because when we go to sleep, it's like a little death. When we go to sleep, our eye consciousness absorbs, it becomes dormant, as well as our ear, nose, tongue, body sense consciousness. They all become, they kind of absorb. It means they go into a dormant state, right? Especially while we're in deep sleep. And then when we wake up, they function again, right? So every time we go to sleep and then wake up, it's like a little death and a little rebirth. The process is very similar. So, but what is it that remains in an active state through, through sleep and rising in the morning, and then through also death and then taking rebirth, is the mental consciousness, right? The sixth mental consciousness. So in the Sutra school, so hold on. So, but even within that mental consciousness, there are different levels. Some more coarse levels of mental consciousness and more subtle levels of mental consciousness. So when we talk about stream of awareness, there's different levels within that, right? But when we talk about pristine awareness, we're talking about the most subtle, innately pure level of mental consciousness, right? Which typically we only
stream of
can experience at the time of death. Yeah.
Isn't it experienced at the time of nirvana?
At the time of when?
Nirvana? Enlightenment?
At the time of
is it experienced?
Nirvana. Oh, enlightenment, yeah, for sure. I mean, enlightened mind is only that most subtle level of mind. But even, you know, long before nirvana or enlightenment, at the time of death, we experience that most subtle level of consciousness. Because at the time of death, what happens is all the coarser levels of consciousness absorb. Just like at the time we're falling asleep, you know, pay attention tonight as you fall asleep. Try to notice as your eye consciousness ceases to function. It's very interesting. It's very difficult to notice. No? By the time our eye consciousness, ear consciousness is absorbing, it's almost like I don't know, it's almost like we fainted or something. It's really difficult to notice that. But you can try. You know? Try to notice as you're falling asleep, you feel your body relaxing. And then can you notice as you lose the ability to see things or hear things anymore? No, I think for most of us it happens very fast, but they say as you're dying, if you're kind of fortunate to be able to die slowly and without too much pain, you can see those sense consciousness cease to function. And then the coarser levels of the mental consciousness, of which the conceptual consciousness is one of the most coarse, they gradually cease to function. And then gradually the more and more subtle levels of mental consciousness cease to function until there's something called the clear light mind of death. So after that is the most subtle level of mind. That becomes manifest at the moment that we actually die, right? And then we can have an experience of that. So, you know, we can train in life, like to gain an experience of that. If you're interested in this topic, there's an excellent book. Shanti, can you type it in the chat? It's called Advice for Dying and Living a Better Life. That's one of the titles, although it's by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. It's part of this really excellent series of books by His Holiness in conjunction with Jeffrey Hopkins, Better Death. And so there he gives a very detailed description of this death process and how to meditate, imagining that process so the purpose of that is in order to identify and try to experience and become familiar with and ultimately use in our meditation practice this most subtle level of the mind. So in short, stream of consciousness, there are many levels. The most subtle level is this pristine awareness.
And this pristine awareness in other traditions is called the soul, isn't it? Isn't it the same thing?
The soul? No.
Yeah.
That's quite different. No, that'd be quite different. No. You can't. That's a really oversimplification. No. I mean, come on. You go around your neighborhood and ask 10 people what the soul is, and you'll get 10 different answers. I guarantee. So,
yeah. But there is a similarity.
What?
There is a similarity in concept on the concept of the Atma, which is similar to the soul, and the Buddhist concept of pristine awareness. I think it's the same thing. It's again a very subtle level realization, not easy to realize or to find.
Sure, yeah. You keep investigating. You keep comparing.
Yeah.
Okay. We should, our time is up now together. So let's dedicate, right? With a few, I don't know, maybe you don't need to use prayers, you just take up more time. So let's rejoice in the effort we made together. You've been an excellent audience. So thank you for all your attention during this time, during these sessions. So let's rejoice together in all the effort we made in the last 2 days during those 4 sessions. So think of the positive motivation we generated each morning. And so with this wholesome intention, think of some of all the things we've discussed and thought about, meditated on together. Think how wonderful it is, how excellent it is. We've made this effort. And then think not only of ourselves and the other participants in the course, but of all the other sentient beings in the world. So many other people around the world doing many, many different kinds of positive things. to help others and to bring about some benefit, some welfare in the world. So we rejoice in all of that. So think all this merit then gathered together, then we can dedicate simply that, by the force of this, just as we aspired in the beginning, by the force of this merit, may every single sentient being, right? So remember the visualization of all sentient beings seated around us. So may every single sentient being, without excluding one, all the humans, all the animals, all the spirits, and devas, and so forth, may they all be free from every form of suffering. Suffering of this life, the suffering of future lives, the suffering of boundless rebirth in samsara, the physical suffering, mental depression, sadness, arrogant pride, every form of suffering, whatever exists, may they all be free from all of that. And henceforth, may all of our actions only contribute to this. And as well, may all beings have every form of happiness and well-being, the physical health and mental joy and insight and wisdom and peace and living harmoniously with one another, up to liberation from samsara and full enlightenment. So especially the immediate hardships or challenges facing us, this pandemic of COVID-19, may it quickly come to an end. And may all people who have gainful employment, healthcare, shelter, prosperity, those who've lost it, and may they quickly have again. And during this time of the pandemic, may everyone have the support, the emotional support, physical, food, clothes, medical care, and so forth that they need. May all violence in the world quickly come to an end. And may there be no more warfare or domestic violence, so forth, again. And especially may the crisis of global climate destruction, may we quickly be able to reduce and eliminate that. So that the natural environment in the world is most conducive for the well-being of all the creatures who inhabit it, and especially for spiritual practice. And then briefly bring to mind any of your own prayers and intentions. If there's anyone specifically that you'd like to send prayers to, then bring them to mind. So may all of your personal prayers and intentions be fulfilled exactly in accordance with your virtuous aspirations. And then finally, may all of our gurus and spiritual teachers and guides have long and stable lives, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Khyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And may they continue to guide us in this and future lives from life to life until we and all sentient beings are free from every form of suffering and achieve full enlightenment. And may especially this Dharma Center, our Root Institute in Bodh may it continue to flourish and be able to offer lots of programs, helpful programs to people like ourselves, and all of the projects. They have a school and a free clinic and a remote clinic. May all of the projects of Root Institute flourish now and long into the future, providing ample benefit to countless sentient beings in Bihar and beyond. Okay, so let's stop there. So thank you very much again. You've been a great team And I hope we meet again in the future.